we wouldn't be wanting to just be taking paper money that they know is going to depreciate. There would be a limit, and I think we're at that point. And when that happens, that will be a major event when the world rejects the dollar. So when it comes and how quickly it comes, those are still unknowns, but it will come, and I think we're starting to see it happen right now.
Absolutely. Congressman, as a doctor, as a congressperson, as someone who's been on the banking committees for many years and studied Austrian economics, for those that don't know, comparing our situation to the Weimar Republic, I see a lot of similarities. We're already seeing inflation in commodities and inflation in food. What is the basic time frame that you see currently? And for those that don't know, what does dollar devaluation and the dollar losing world reserve currency status mean for people?
Well, it means higher prices and eventually higher interest rates, which means higher prices again. The government always reports statistics that are deceiving, and they tell us that inflation is like 1.5%, 2%, and yet if you talk to the average person, they know that prices are going up. And you're right about the commodities. There was a report yesterday, I think it was the S&P Commodity Index for last year, a whole group of commodities. It was up at 24%. That's huge, and you can't have that and not have that translate into day-to-day living. And people know this. The energy prices are going to go up, and it wouldn't take much to push that oil up over $100. It's bouncing around there already, and which means the standard of living goes down. If an individual borrows and they get into debt, but they live high on the hog and they buy more cars than they need and have a fancy house, and their job is just marginal, but if they lose their job or prices go up, they get wiped out, and they have to, in order to get back on their feet again, they have to work harder and spend less. It's a little different with a country because they have this printing press and they're able to tax people, but there is a limit. But the economic law is the same for the country as it is for the individual. The country eventually has to live beneath its means, and that's what we're witnessing now, and it usually hits some people more than others. So the middle class and the poor get hit the first. They lose their jobs, and they're hurt the most through the inflation. The very wealthy, actually, there's a transfer of wealth. This has been argued by Austrian economists for decades, that when you destroy a currency, it erodes the value of the currency, but the middle class suffer the most, and the wealth is accumulated by the very rich.
And we see that.
We're seeing that, and what does it do? It drives up resentment. And if they don't fully understand this, the middle class who's getting wiped out, they only have anger, and they might strike out at everybody who has wealth rather than the wealth that has been accumulated because of the government programs.
And the social engineers, as you know, Dr. Paul, Congressman, they're fully aware of that, the pressure from above and below. And so right when they got rid of the Glass-Steagall 11 years ago, we start seeing RAND Corporation reports. We start seeing Department of Defense reports saying we've got to basically set up a police state because there's a danger of social unrest coming because of the dwindling middle class. And now we see a British Ministry of Defense report saying the same thing in 2007, and lo and behold, now Homeland Security's putting in 9,000 locations, telescreens saying watch your neighbors. 3 new videos were released yesterday, frightening videos by Homeland Security airing on TV. They're up on Infowars.com and PrisonPlanet.com if listeners want to see it or if the congressman hasn't seen it. And it's got people in shopping malls and on the streets, and it shows DHS, TSA on the streets searching people, and it says, we're going to protect you, but we need you to watch your neighbors. I mean, clearly they're trying to bring in an authoritarian system, not for Al-Qaeda or these overseas reported threats, but they're now shifting it over to domestic groups, and we saw that attempt to attack conservatives and libertarians and yourself and myself and even Sarah Palin and Rush Limbaugh and talk radio and the First Amendment after the tragic shooting. So can you speak to that, sir, and this conscious movement towards authoritarianism? Well,
there's no doubt about it, and you're absolutely right about the disruption that comes to the communities because it is there. Most major changes occur, domestically. We take an oath of office to obey the Constitution and defend it against enemies, foreign and domestic. Well, I usually make that point, and even in the very, very patriotic crowds and veterans, which you think would be more hawkish, if you emphasize, the domestic threat, they understand this. So, but I think we're actually winning this argument about this need for militarism around the world to protect ourselves, and that we have to worry about domestically, because people are getting tired of having somebody from the government check every single thing. Back again to China, you can start businesses easier in China than here. So people who have land, people who want to start a business, people who have to pay these high taxes and pay for all these regulations, they're starting to realize this. So I think there's a healthy resistance developing. But like you point out, there is some danger here, and that is, of course, if we get people to understand where the cause comes from, that we might be able to prevent this. See, the one coalition that we should build, we talk a lot about the poor getting poorer and the middle class being wiped out, but the left always thinks, well, the answer to that is just more transfer of wealth. But we have to get them to understand that the reason this happens is because government is too big. Even though they argue for government programs, the government is too big. They argue for these programs, and guess who lost their homes? The rich got richer, and the poor people lost their homes because of this program. But the other big issue is to make sure that people know that corporatism is not free market economics, and that's a misunderstanding.
Well, that was my other point, and I'm glad you got into that, because we're of the same mind because we've studied history, but quantify that for listeners who may be new. The ultra robber baron, non-free market crony capitalist always, as Carol Quigley said at Georgetown, Bill Clinton's mentor, lobby for authoritarianism, whether it's right-wing, left-wing, fascist, socialist, communist, because they create this big pool of collectivized wealth, and they take it offshore. And now the ultra-rich are trying to sell the poor people who are losing their jobs on higher taxes and looting their neighbor who's got more money than them, selling them the lie that that's going to give them a good economy when it's freedom that's going to give them a future.
Yeah, and then they lump everybody together. If you are a businessman, and there are a lot of very decent, wealthy businessmen in this country that earned it and didn't have to live off the government, but they get lumped into that. So when there's unrest, everybody's lumped together, whether they're the people who lived off the government, lived off the taxpayer, or whether they were successful because they delivered good products to consumers at good prices. So there's a big difference there. And, I've had some discussion with Ralph Nader, and I imagine there are a few of your listeners that can't stand Ralph Nader, but I like to talk to him because we do come up with some agreements on this. I mean, he hates this corporatism, and he doesn't like the war and things. So I work with people who can agree with me on some of this. So this is what we have to do is make sure our definitions are clear. Then we have a better chance at solving these problems.
Very well said. Congressman, we're seeing riots all over the world over global inflation driven by the devaluation of the dollar and other fiat currencies. You've been mentioning unrest here, and clearly we're seeing more and more signs of that here. And I remember you back in Austin giving a speech that I attended 7 years ago. We were talking about it during the break when you first got on, and you warned that when the empire starts collapsing, there's two ways to go. It's either recognize that big government breeds corruption and go the opposite direction towards liberty, but that more often than not, instead, the government's going to sell even more of the same as the solution. And so now is the time to get this out to people. I mean, this is a life and death situation for our republic, is it not?
Yes, and it's hard teaching people some of these lessons in the midst of a crisis because then, and you can understand the emotions, when law and order breaks down, most people say, well, just quit the killing, calm down things, you better bring more police in. And that's, a pretty natural response, but not realizing that we have had too many policemen already and too many bureaucrats and too much federal government, too much taxes and all that. So it is, to me, the earlier the education occurs, the better. I think people have to know and understand why it's in their best interest. that the free market works better. People think that you have to sacrifice and all this. I don't think you have to sacrifice a thing. Freedom. If you get your freedom, you don't have to sacrifice anything because you have your incentives. You can take care of yourself a lot better than the government, and that's a system that has worked. And unfortunately, we're about to give it up, and that's why I fear the day when law and order breaks down. But questioning whether there'll be riots in our streets like there have been overseas already, and I suspect that the American people are like other people, and even in the 60s we had our riots and our shares of problems here, so people will act in a violent manner, and that's up for grabs, and all factions then will be looking to get the powers and the strings of government, so we have a big job ahead of us.
So we're going into some very stormy waters?
No doubt. It's coming.
Congressman, no doubt you've probably heard about it or seen it, but CNN, MSNBC, Democracy Now!, they all singled you and I out specifically and played clips of you speaking in your Texas Straight Talk and clips of my radio/TV show where we talked about the Second Amendment being there, and it's in the Declaration of Independence, it's in the Bill of Rights, to defend against crime on the streets, but also against a tyrannical government. And they have tried to now demonize and imply that you and I and others are the progenitors in an asinine way of what happened in Tucson, which we now know was a schizophrenic who was politically a liberal. I'm not blaming the Democrats. But what do you think about the desperation? We saw Rachel Maddow and others go after your son and tell a laundry list of Dr. Rand Paul, and of course that backfired on him, only seemed to boost his approval rating when Clinton went and campaigned against him. Now we see them doing it against you and I because they see us as a threat because we're getting the truth out. What is your view on the ratcheting up of their rhetoric, Congressman Steve Cohen calling Republicans Nazis a few days ago, and the fact that it's backfiring in every case from the polls we're seeing?
Well, there's a limit, and that says something for the American people. Maybe they won't buy into that, but they're certainly going to make the effort. And this is a frustration for me because I do make a diligent effort to try to work with honest, straightforward people who may be called progressives and liberals, because some of them are decent and they're honest, but they're not these demagogues. And those people who turn on you, their goal is more like the promotion of the Democrat Party or promoting of government power. So they might say they agree with us on a couple issues, but I sort them out, and some of them, the ones that you're talking about, are just the demagogues who may say one thing and say, oh yeah, we don't like this, we don't like that, but then they'll turn on you and they'll do anything to maintain their power or to discredit us for what we're doing.
Well, and it's also hypocritical. They're demonizing the First Amendment and talking about fairness doctrine for talk radio, FCC, jurisdiction over the Internet. This is all being announced while Matthews is calling white people crackers. Maddow is implying that we're causing violence. The congressman's calling Republicans Nazis. I mean, it's just incredible how they're trying to balkanize and turn the American people against each other. When you look at the polls, liberals, conservatives, libertarians, almost everybody's against